spend more time up here with you gathered around, maybe even drilling or using the wrench all yourselves. Okay? So yesterday we covered the economics and cost basics. And that's what the handouts covers. So that we covered what the basics of photovoltaic systems are. We covered the starting paperwork. There's more paperwork in today's details. We spent a lot of time talking about roofs and how to mount on the roof. Blair, as you can see, is a professional. Cares a lot about the aesthetics of the system at the end after you're done. And as a professional, of course, he's got to make sure his customers are very satisfied. If you're doing it yourself, aesthetics may or may not be as important to you, especially with the backside of your house that your neighbors don't see or something like that, or facing a hillside or whatever. So, getting the waves out of a roof and making the roof look nice and straight and flat because the panels have been adjusted to fit takes a lot of work. But I think Blair gave a lot of hints yesterday on how to make that happen. It might be a detail some of you don't care about, but it makes the system look so much nicer if you do care about it or your neighbors see it. We're also going to kind of talk about the rest of system installation. So we talked kind of about the roof stuff yesterday. We'll also talk somewhat about the components that don't go on the roof, that go elsewhere, and particularly the grounding and the wiring aspects of that. We'll briefly talk about the final step before you turn it on, called commissioning, and then annual maintenance. Okay, who has diagrams they brought with them? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. We'll definitely spend some time with you. If not, maybe when some people are over there, you can find me separately, or Bill, or Blair. It depends on how we're working up there. Or certainly we'll make time before we wrap up this evening to review what you've got. Okay, Blair, you want to kind of review where we were? Didn't quite finish install as the fourth step yesterday. We kind of got through the sizing, applying paperwork, equipment ordering, and started the installation.
So yeah, last night we had gone through what Jack had just mentioned in the install part, I believe. We got to the inverters. But I just want to start and just go over everything again, because a lot of times there's a lot of information if you're not familiar to electrical trade, the solar industry. A lot of times we just dump a lot of information on you, and it's kind of hard to sift through that. So I find it best if we just kind of review a little bit, go over just mainly the components. So when I say a name or a phrase, it kind of triggers something in your mind, and you know what I'm talking about. And I'll spend the next 15 or 20 seconds trying to define that term in your head, and then try to catch up. So we just have a picture of a one-line diagram here, and again the order of everything from, if you can picture the sun over on this side of your diagram shining down onto these panels, and you have a string of panels here. Each panel is going to have a separate inverter. So each panel is tied into its inverter, and then electrically the inverters have their own trunk cable, its own cable that clicks to, and that trunk cable goes along to a junction box on your roof, on the side of your roof, however you want to get the electric down. That's really it electrically on the roof, other than that copper bond wire we talked about yesterday that just bonds the rails together, and you could run that down. We didn't actually, Gabe and I checked our code book. We didn't find anything about running a bare copper and conduit. So, what's that?
I found great.
Great, yeah. So you can run that copper wire inside the conduit. You can run the copper wire outside the conduit. That's really up to you. Jack's holding that trunk cable there. And that's something you can't buy at Home Depot. We'll provide that for you if you do want to get it through us. But yeah, so you have your panels to the inverters. All the inverters are all wired together through that trunk cable. And then you have a junction box. And that's where you transition to whatever wire you want to get. 12 gauge wire. We just say 12.3 Romex because that has 2 hot wires, a neutral and a ground. 12.3 is the yellow stuff, and it'll say right on it 12/3. You connect that from your junction box through your attic or along the side of your building. That has to be in the conduit if it's on the outside. But, and that, then you go to your auxiliary production meter, which is, that's your own meter itself. That is how you kind of monitor your own system. If you do the online monitoring, that will monitor how much production you have also. And over time, you'll actually notice a discrepancy between what it says online and what your meter says, your own personal meter says, is because that meter accounts for certain losses. Because at night, these systems will actually have a little bit of electrical draw, just being kind of in standby mode. So that'll, you know, there will be a discrepancy over time, but after you wire through your meter, then you'll go to the outside disconnect. That's one of the main things you got to remember, is having that external outside disconnect, that's like a $10 disconnect from Home Depot or Eastern Penn, one of those places from. That itself is located near your electric meter, typically. If it's not, you just need to designate that on your site plan. And then from that auxiliary production meter, you go into your electrical panel, and that would be a double 20 breaker. And then if you do multiple strings of more than 15 panels per string, or if you have more than 15 panels, you'll do multiple strings, and you'll just have to combine that into a sub-panel. Do we remember those things, or is that, you know, a refresher, or are there still questions on some of that? Yes?
If you're gonna put these panels on a barn, and the
Yes.
barn is, almost like 50 feet maybe from the house, and the
Okay.
house is where the meter is,
Yep.
how do you work with something like that?
How much power do you have out at your barn? As far as like a circuit breaker rating, or is it just one circuit that comes out to it? Not sure.
That's my husband's department.
Okay. If you have it's an excellent question. We actually have a customer this fall, probably will be putting up a system. His barn is, you know, far away, but he's got conduit underground to his house. He only has 2 circuits out in his barn, so what we're gonna do is just use his existing feed line, which is only
Well, there's poles that have wires that go out to the barn.
oh yeah, poles, okay. So chances are it's probably a little bit heavier, but what you would do is you would feed into that panel itself, and this is something you could designate on your site plan, because remember, when you do the paperwork part of it is, to do the interconnection is you need a, you know, copy of your inverter specifications. That's that front and back page with all the information they're gonna need. You need the actual application, which you type in, you punch in all that information off the paper. And then you're gonna need a 1-line diagram, which is something as simple as this. And then you're also gonna need a site plan for PP&L or Penelec, whoever it is, where you just sketch out a bird's eye view of your property and where your meter is, you know, where your solar array is gonna be, where the inverter is, and where your disconnect's gonna be.
So do they put it in kind of underground, or they follow the wires that are there? Or
You could use the wires going overhead, and what I would do in that situation is, say you have a 200 amp service and a 100 amp sub panel that goes over the barn. You could backfeed into, consider this, as far as your picture, consider this your sub panel at the barn, and then you just have to label that accordingly. And then on your site plan, you designate where your actual disconnect is for the utility.
I would imagine there's probably at least a 200 amp service out there, because he's got a radiator shaft down there.
Okay. Yeah, so he probably has plenty of electric to backfeed into it. Yes?
So what I understand then is our power comes into a box that's on a pole, and then from there it goes to the barn, into the building, into the house. And the barn has a box with the breakers and stuff. So you could go right into that box?
Yeah, if you
wouldn't
have,
have to go to the main?
yeah, if you have, say, a pole-mounted meter, and probably if it goes from 3 different places from there, probably have that your main panel right there technically by code. And then that goes out and services the 3 different buildings. So in that case, you're not gonna go rip up all the ground just to put a a disconnect by the meter. You're just gonna put one on the building, and then what you do is you'll just have a sticker that you slap on the actual, utility meter itself that says this building has a, you know, photovoltaic array on it.
But that wire that comes from can go into the box in the barn then? It doesn't have to go to
Correct, yeah, you don't have to worry about pulling something through the existing you could go, you know, because for a while there, the code was written that you have to be fed into the main panel. And then, you know, it's a great code if we understand the reasoning, because you want the disconnect right next to the meter, but, I mean, how many people have underground services or a meter on a pedestal where they can't get to it without serious electrical and excavation work? So, yeah.
There are extra labeling requirements when you relocate the disconnect away from the meter.
If you're,
And like you kind of said, as long as the wires that you have feeding the barn are size large enough to handle what the solar arrays are produced, right? I mean, you kind of touched on that, but.
yeah, it's not like you can only have like a 20 amp circuit going out to the barn, and then you're gonna try to backfeed 50 amps to the house through that. You need a substantial amount. And if there's questions or whatever, you know, feel free to give me a call and just ask me and say, okay, this is my breaker rating that's feeding the barn, and this is how many solar panels I want to put on. So, any other questions? Yes.
What if you want to put in a subsystem which doesn't have any, which is totally independent from your grid connected system? In other words, you're looking for grid independence, really.
Oh, you want to
Maybe
go
for
off the grid?
critical user items. Do you need to get a permit for that if it has no connection to your existing grid system?
That's something you have to check with your township. Check with your township to see if you have to have a permit. There's several in the area, Lebanon, Dyeberry, are two that come to my mind that I know that you don't actually need a permit to do a solar array. However, you still need an electrical inspection to get the interconnection with PP&L. So if you're doing something completely separate from the utility, you should still check with your township to see if they require a permit. Damascus is another one. And then to make sure that, okay, do you require a permit? And then no, then you can put it up without getting a permit or anything. So,
But we want to be clear, everything we've talked about in this class, this 2 days workshop, is for grid-connected systems.
I
So
know.
the design requirements, the code compliance requirements are totally different for an off-grid system. So be aware that you'll need to learn it differently.
I'm aware of that.
That's fine. Okay, thanks.
okay, I think that's,
So that's, any questions else on the review and components? Okay.
so, installing the panels. We talked about that yesterday. We showed you the, everything was all up here. We took some of it down so that way we could get up here and just see it being installed live in front. We feel like that's kind of a better way to install it after we've done, or to present this after we've done 3 or 4 of these already. We come to that conclusion. But you have this, here's your inverter mounted. We've gone through and we've measured, you know, our rails, and we've started them all on one side. We've straightened them up. So we're going to start left to right. We started them here and made sure all these rails were true where we wanted to actually to start our panels, and then we go about 1.5 inches in and put our first panel, put our end clips, and then we go across. But before that, we had also measured where our inverters are going to be, right almost in the center of the panel, a little bit offset on down the line, and we lay out all of our inverters. Then we come through and lay out our trunk line, this trunk cable that the inverters plug into. You could put a couple zip ties on those to hold them up, click them in, go through, get your serial numbers off of them. That way, again, later on down the line, you could have these solar panels have, most of the time have cardboard to them. These inverters come in big cardboard boxes, so we just take a utility knife and cut a big piece of cardboard and take a Sharpie and draw a big grid and just start putting stickers and numbers down. That way we keep track of it. And I mean, you'll kind of get into a rhythm where you'll say, oh crap, I forgot, the last 3 panels. But it's good before you start the panels, to go through and do all the inverters. Just have one person go through and do all the inverters and make sure you have them all down, and then the panels themselves, it's easier to get the serial number off of those once you've been going along. But so you have all your inverters run, your trunk cables there, these are all clicked in. The only other thing we do before we start laying panels is actually run that copper bond wire. We said the newer codes that they have, the newer material that they're using for the rails themselves is, again, if you have something, a really long rail that you need to combine two of them, they make a splice bar for it. You just attach that together, tighten down on it, and that maintains a mechanical bond, between the whole rail. And then your panels all bond the upper and lower rail together through the mid clips. There's no little gadgets anymore that you have to use in between those. However, if you're doing multiple rows, or say you have a dormer coming out of your roof, and you have 6 panels on this side and 6 panels on that side, and nothing in between, you still got to connect those with a jumper of the bond wire. Or if you have multiple rows, you bond every other rail to maintain that mechanical bond. And then that number 6 copper wire, we recommend by code, just because you can run it anywhere, and it can be subject to physical abuse and stuff like that, but still maintaining its integrity. You just run that down. The bonding side of things, you run that down to your, put a ground rod in for your system. I mean, it's kind of silly because you have 2 ground rods for your electrical service, and a lot of times you run your wire right down next to the existing electrical service, you clamp onto that, and then you drive a ground rod and ground right next to it. It's kind of redundant, but it's what the code is. You do a ground mount that you have a 8-inch steel I-beam that's sunk 4 feet in the ground, 5 feet in the ground, covered in concrete, which is a better ground than any ground rod will ever be. But you still got to put all that metal is all bonded to itself, and then you still got to put a ground rod in the ground next to it. It's kind of like, if you ever had an issue, it's not going to follow the ground rod into the ground to maintain your bond. It's going to choose any one of these big chunks of steel that's sitting in moist concrete. So, but I don't write the code book. I just have to follow it. And now we've got everything set. We've got our rails. We've got our inverters all set. Everything's all set. Our bond wire's down. We've driven our ground rod. Now this is where you start carrying panels. This is usually where the wind picks up and you're walking around with a big, big panel, and then you're getting blown all over the roof. It's fun, it happens. And you fight like you can't believe to hold on to that thing because you're walking around with a $200 or $300 solar panel and you don't want to drop it, even if it means paralysis or something like going off the roof. But you hold on to it. It's amazing how you're willing to go off the roof with it. Like you could carry it down to the ground smoother than it could carry itself. But just be careful, because now you're carrying these panels. Common question is, how much do they weigh? Roughly 45 pounds. They're just a little bit bulky, a little awkward. And what we'll do is we'll carry the panels up and we'll set, you have a bottom rail here, and we'll just tuck them right down onto the bottom rail. And if it's not a windy day, we'll set about 5 of them up at a time, and then get 2 people up there and we'll start installing them. But again, you start on one side, and you want to establish that row, that upper row, because that really dictates how everything looks. That really dictates, how smooth the rest of the installation is going to go. And that is going to take the most time, and sometimes you'll find you're going up or down according to the roof line. And sometimes you just have to look at the roof and realize, okay, the roof itself isn't the best roof. I could either follow the roof line and have the solar array look silly, or I could just straighten everything up. And a lot of times on those of you with barns, that's kind of what you have to do, is just make it a nice straight line, as smooth as possible. Ways that we've done it, you put a panel, say you have a row of 10, you put one panel here and then just run a dry line across, and then just set temporarily another panel on the other side, and that kind of helps you get an idea. It's not the best, but it's a way to start. But yeah, so you put your panel down. Come up here, you start, square off these end rails, and then what you do is you'll have end clips. There's a difference between end clips and mid clips. End clips are kind of like an L shape that clamp right on the end of a row, and then mid clips go right in the middle of each panel. So we could pass these around. Here's your end clip. You can see kind of that little L shape, and it just hooks down in there. You'll notice that the bottom of the bolt is actually a little T bolt setup. It makes it nice so when you are fighting with the panel and you're holding it on the roof, you just slide it right in the grooves of the rail, and then give it a little quarter turn, and that straightens it up, and it won't go past that, and you just keep tightening down the nut, holding pressure against that quarter turn that you made, and it holds itself in place. These you don't want to get overly aggressive with. We just use a little 7/16 deep well ratchet, something small. You don't have to get crazy on it, because if you do crank too much, this is that stainless steel you were talking about last night that it can, was that Jamie that was talking about that? You were, yeah, okay. You crank on it a little bit too much, and it'll actually break. But I mean, you really gotta work it pretty good. But don't be afraid to just. There are torque specifications on these on the websites. I'm not sure what they are, but you could look those up if you're concerned with that. And then here's your mid clip. It's just a little U bracket with 2 ends on it. Same idea. You just plop it down in there, give it a quarter turn, and tighten down. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll have one person on the side of the roof like this, holding the panel, tighten down the 2 end clips, and then we'll have another person bring the next panel as he reaches over and tightens down the mid clips, and then he moves to the next panel. They set it down, eye it up, and usually the person setting the panels that has a good eye to lay back and look across the actual top of the panels to eye everything up, and then you'll stand back and look at the roof line and look at the panels, and a lot of checking and looking the first time. Don't always go by your shingle line either, because that's very rarely straight. You'll pull your hair out. I mean, you'll look at someone's roof and say, well, that's a nice looking roof, and then when you actually get up on it and look at the shingle line, it's like you don't even notice it until you're actually up there. But some of those shingle lines are pretty outrageous. But
So did you just mount a panel without clicking it into the inverter?
I did. So usually that's what happens is you're fighting, it's only 45 pounds, but you're trying not to have it slide around. So you get it set where you want it, you tighten it down, everything's great, and then you move on to the next panel and you forget that you didn't click these together. So what you do is, when you're setting the panel, a lot of times you'll hold it at a little bit of an angle. One person will hold it, the other person comes up underneath. Remember, your inverter is already here, clicked into the trunk line. So you just take the 2 leads off the back of the panel, and then reach in there and click it in, zip tie it, and then lay it down. And as you lay it down, you'll pull the slack out of this next, pull the slack out of everything, zip tying it as you go, and then set the second panel on there. Put the mid clip on, or set the second panel up there, click it in, zip tie it, and then do the clip. I think what is the click, zip, clips. Say that 5 times fast, and then you'll still not know what you're talking about. But set the panel, you want to get those 2 rubber clips, and then once you get those clips established, set the panel, click it together, zip tie it, and then put your mid clips on. The next panel comes up, you click the wires in, zip tie it, then put the clips on. If that's not confusing, then I don't know what would be.
Get into a rhythm, as Jamie said yesterday. They only fit one way, so.
So again, after you establish a row, you can come back and write down the serial numbers then. We like to recommend that you write them down as you go, because you sometimes get ahead of yourself if you're doing a big system and forget, and all of a sudden you're 2 or 3 rows deep and you're climbing on top of panels with some things. So if you were to, this is a ground mount that we did, that the home built his own mount. He had put piers in the ground and then used some locust wood and built just like a roof rafter system. And it was actually real nice because he was a really particular contractor that did a very good job putting everything together. So this went up relatively nicely and as nice as it can in December, but This is what it looks like from behind. You have his, if you can picture looking at this from your attic space without the sheathing or shingles on there. Here's his roof rafter, and then you have the rail going across. There's probably an L-foot here, and there's the rail going across. Here's the actual inverter that's mounted to the rail. And then what you have here is his cable that goes from the inverter and plugs into up and around to here, plugs into that trunk cable that's zip tied along the back. And here's that zip tie that's holding that wire up off the roof. If it has sags in it that you can see, okay, that's all right, but you just don't want to touch the roof. And then the other wires are from that black part up on top that they come down. There's actually a loop in these. Somebody just put a nice little loop in those, and then they come into the inverter itself. And that's your positive and negative leads that we showed on the back of the panels. These panels, I think, are Canadian Solar. They come with their own little bow tie in the wires themselves. And the first couple of panels, we would take them off and then click them in and then zip tie them up again. But it actually worked out well because that loop takes all the slack out of them. We just have to put one zip tie on. So you'll find your own rhythm, you'll find your own pace, but that's what it looks like from the back, if you can see it without, because no one really can cram their face underneath here and see it, and that's a picture of what's going on. Everything is nice and neat and orderly, and nothing would be touching the roof there. Any questions on that? And then the wiring part. So we talked about how you have everything set up, how you have your trunk cable coming out, and then the last trunk cable ends here, and then what do you do with that? We explained yesterday a little bit, we got into this with the junction box. You bring it into a PVC junction box. If you have more than one string, get a bigger one. If you want to use a bigger one just to start with, go for it, because they're a couple bucks more and gives you more room to get your hands and stuff in there. And we'll just drill the bottom side of it. If it's sitting on a roof like this, we'll drill the bottom side of it. That's way it's less likely for any water to get into it. And we'll put a 1/2-inch compression connector in there, or 3/4, depending on what works better. Probably 3/4 for this. And bring this wire up in there. And then through the back of this, we'll drill another hole with whatever connector we're using there. Just probably a Romex connector to go down. And then we'll go with Romex, the 12-3 Romex through there. And again, this has that butyl rubber. You could pick it up. It's called, I think it's called Bitchathane, is what they refer to it as in Derlin Brothers and stuff like that. It's B-I-T-U-P-H-E-T. Just ask for the really sticky, aggressive stuff. I'm not sure exactly how it's spelled, but I did okay with butyl yesterday. And then just silicone around it. I mean, that's really the most devastating part of the roof that you're going to do. And that's simply, I mean, all the roof attachments, they're all flash. You don't have to worry about them leaking. But this is the only real heavy-duty penetration you're going to make. And we just do the best we can to silicone it and seal it up. You could also use, that's the one name brand they use. There's also at the Do-It Center store in Hamlin is actually we found mobile home roof repair patch. And it comes, it's like gray and it comes in a roll that's about that wide. You just cut a couple pieces of that and tie it underneath there. So.
Or for a metal roof, or even a shingle roof, you put it in conduit and it come out, go down the side of the house, right?
Yeah, correct. Yep. So you can also, if you wanted to, get a small junction box, and you could actually mount this to the panel itself. To the rail itself if you wanted to. Excuse me, you could mount it underneath a panel, because technically by code, you're not supposed to cover up junction boxes in walls and bury them in places you can't access. This is still considered accessible if it's behind a panel, because you could always remove the panel to work on the wires. So, but then, yes, you have your trunk cable with the weatherproof box. You go from 12-3 Romex to your sub panel and or your production meter. You know, we talked about going to a sub panel if you have multiple strings. If you have multiple runs of the trunk cable, you'll be bringing those separate runs of 12.3 into a sub panel to combine them there. And then that way you go from there into your auxiliary production meter. That way this is your own personal meter to keep track of the solar. And then from there, you could put that outside if you want. You could put that inside if you want. If you want it right next to your bed, you could do that too. Wherever you want to put it, it's up to you. You know, some people like that idea when they wake up in the morning. Well, it's not going to change early in the morning when you wake up, but it's your option. Wherever you want to put that. Most of the time, it's right there next to the original meter, your utility meter, or it's down in the basement next to your main panel. And then from there, we can't just go into our main panel again. We have to go out to that disconnect and then back into the main panel. And again, this is just a simple, cheap little disconnect, non-fused, pull-out disconnect, able to satisfy 60 amps, which your solar array might be 20 amps, 30, 40, 60 amps is really big. And yeah, if you have something that big, just talk to me and we'll discuss how to easily run that. And here you have a picture of this guy's sub panel. This is again that ground mount where we had made junction boxes underneath that wooden structure that he had. And then with those junction boxes, we brought in the wire, 12-3 wire into here. He's got 3 different double 20 breakers. And then that's all combined into one, you know, one run. So it all goes through the main, the auxiliary production meter. And then from there, this actually goes underground to his house to tie into his main panels. Because this was out, he's got an organic farm, and it's out in his field, and he didn't have any power out there to begin with, so he needed to run his power 300 feet underground in line, underground. And then here you have that small little line is that bond wire that bonds that panel to everything in the system. You don't have to bond your panel, it's just we had no other ground, so we just grounded everything that was out there. Then it says disconnect to the breaker, and again, when you're tying it into your main panel or any other panel that you might be tying it into, just tie it into the bottom right or left corner of that panel is by code, and that way they want, if there's any power coming into that bus bar of your electric panel, they want the power coming in from your normal way it comes in into your house from the utility, or into your barn from your house, and then they want to feed the other power from different ends of the bus bar. That way you don't overpower just a small part of the bus bar. And then the bonding wire to the ground rod and to the existing house ground. So, and again, if you're out somewhere really far and you can't get back to your house, then just bond it to whatever you have coming in, and that should suffice. Okay, so we've got our system all installed, and what we do is, if you want to think about your system, you have your junction box coming from the roof, everything's all connected. What we'll do is, in order from right to left, if we're coming off our roof into our junction box, a lot of times before we make these connections, we'll just test the voltage, or you know, the connections are really the last things we make. We run all of our wires, and then we'll come back and make all of our connections. And as we make our connections, you can test your voltage on here to make sure you're getting 240 volts. You know, 120 if you have one leg to ground, the other leg to ground is 120, then across them is 240. So we check our voltages here. On the panel side of things, we check our voltages here, and we check our voltages here.
You gotta do this during the sunshine. You can't do it at night.
Well, all these, because it is a microinverter system,
Right.
what you'll do is you know, you don't want to be working any live wires. So after you tie in to your main panel with the breaker, you can turn that breaker on, and then that'll send power to your outside disconnect. And then you test there to make sure you're getting the proper voltage, make sure you didn't wire something wrong. And then you plug in your disconnect, and that disconnect should go into here. And then you test your meter to make sure, okay, you're getting proper voltage in your meter. And then, okay, then you could put your meter in temporarily, and then you should get a proper voltage here, and then you could actually make your connections. I mean, every time you're making connections and stuff like that, don't be working live wires, turn off the one before it, so. Then once you have everything checked and the voltage works, then you actually turn everything on at once and just see the meter spin. Watch for some sort of production. Again, the sun has to be out for that. Even if it's not out, even if it's kind of a cloudy day, you should still see something moving. I mean, it's really got to be pretty dark and dreary for it not to be doing anything. And you'll notice, like if it's a blue, clear sky like it is now, and it'll be spinning pretty good, and all of a sudden you'll see it, you'll know when a cloud goes by, because all of a sudden it'll slow down a little bit, and then the cloud moves past the sun, and then it just keeps going, so.
Like at night, where you get 240 volts?
Because it's backfed from the main, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have to remember, electricity doesn't care.
But let's say, you have you're checking, you want to check your wiring, so you disconnect with that.
Yeah, then if the sun's not shining, it'll float. It'll float, so it could be anything.
Is
So,
there some threshold of energy that they have to receive before they?
Each inverter will make that separate, individually.
and one other thing I've got to point out is when you wire these auxiliary production meters, what you're monitoring is actually the solar production. So typically, if this was a regular utility and you had just a mast coming down with the, you swing from the pole over to your house and it comes down into here, and that utility ties onto the upper parts of this meter. And then feeds down through when you come off the bottom side, and that measures how much the utility is giving to you. So we don't want to measure that, what the utility is giving to the solar array, we want to measure what the solar is producing. So you always tie your solar to the top of the top lugs in here, and then the bottom ones, where you put that meter in, makes the connections, and that way it monitors how much that's producing. And then, like we said, you can turn your system on briefly. There's a little bit of commissioning with the inverters themselves, but that's like a little 2-page picture book that comes with the inverters. It only takes a second to do, and I won't explain that. I mean, we are going with Enphase, but it's very simple to do. And then, commissioning it is just you have an internet web page also. I strongly advise the internet monitoring, simply because it's so simple for you to diagnose it. With the actual little monitor they give you, it just tells you, okay, you have 12 panels installed, and this panel isn't working. It's a lot easier just to whip out your phone and look at it and say, okay, it's producing this much. You'll get alerts, you'll get updates. We had a customer that gave me a call, I think it was in February or March, just because their online thing wasn't reported. There was an actual issue with the reporting of the internet part of things, because they had actually switched modems or something like that. But that's how they noticed there was an issue with the system. Come to find out there was no issue with the system, it was just the interface between the new modem that was giving the problem. However, they wouldn't have ever known that if they didn't have, the monitoring system. It didn't affect production or anything, but it's always nice to have that. I mean, you could always tell if there's a panel that went wrong. I think Martin had to replace a couple of panels, first year he went into business, or a couple inverters that his customers knew went wrong just because they came up on their phone on their monitoring and says this one's not working, and there's actually an issue with a batch of inverters that they had sold. Yes, Kathy?
If you don't have a fancy phone, can you monitor it on your computer?
Yes, you can monitor it online. Enphase Enlighten is the website, and you go on there and it shows you like a map and a model of your array and everything. It's really, really nice, but you don't need a smartphone. I just say that because it seems like everybody has one of those these days. And then once you have your system up and running, you know it's working okay, you turn it off. And it frustrates you because then you schedule your inspection because you're not really supposed to run it. You have a trial test phase that you could do. I think it's like 15 minutes you're allowed to actually run it to make sure everything's going okay. But turn it off, get your inspection, he'll come, explain to him what you did. Don't be intimidated by the electrical inspector. You just explain, hey, I was at the do-it-yourself workshop. Most of the inspectors in the area know that we do this. So, Paul Bundle was here last night, he's inspected several of our systems. And just let them know what you did, they'll look for the bonding and they'll look for the stickers. We were telling a guy last night that a different inspector, who doesn't know as much about the electrical stuff. He knows the safety things to look for, but he doesn't know that much about electrical, then all of a sudden you dump something like solar panels on him, and he's a little bit overwhelmed. So the one day he comes up to us and inspecting just a regular electrical job that we did, and he said, I gotta ask you a question. I said, yeah. He said, so-and-so put, he's like, somebody that I inspected put up 8 panels. He's like, what would you charge for a job like that? I said, if it was worst case scenario, the most expensive panels you can get, I forget what it was. Say it was 10 grand. Okay. And he's like, they had it put on by so-and-so and it was, 22 grand or something. And I was like, whoa, somebody from way out of the area. It's not like I'm trying to bash a local guy or something like that. Someone I've never heard of. But he's like, yeah, they came up from somewhere and they put it up and yeah, they really took advantage of them and stuff. And he's like, but you know what? I actually had to fail them. I said, really? He's like, I had to fail him. He's like, yeah. He's like, they didn't have any stickers. He's like, and he trusts us because we do good electrical work. He knows us. So he's like, and that if I had to fail him on electrical inspection, it must have been bad. And then so I said, yeah, I guess so. But the thing he looked for was bonding, and he looked for the stickers to make sure you have the stickers. And if you go with the system, we'll give you the stickers and tell him where to put them. But that was the thing, is he looked and, okay, the bonding was okay, but the stickers, they weren't there, and he knows that's part of it. So those are the safety things, is they want those warning labels on, so people don't get hurt or, don't go diving into someone's electrical system and then realize there's power coming from another end that they're not aware of. So, so when you meet with the inspector, just tell them what's going on. I did this, my first installation I ever did, explain to him everything that we did in the process and how it went. They're more interested in it than anything. So they like to talk to you about it and encourage you that you actually did it. So, and then the only thing you need to bring with you is if you have some sort of utility, not utility, some sort of township paperwork, if you have a permit that he needs to sign off on. So he'll sign off on that, and then the other thing is there's part 2 of the interconnection agreement with the utility company. Part 1 is you send away before to get approved, and then part 2 is to send back to them saying, I actually installed it. So then they sign off on it. The inspector signs off on it, you send that away. The inspector will most of the time give the information to the township for you. And then after that, you just, it's called cutting card with the utility. And basically wait, you send in that to that utility company. You sign it, the installer signs it when we do it for a customer, and then the inspector signs it and sends that away. Then you just wait. Again, utility companies are slow, and they're very slow, and then sometimes they're even slower than that, so you want to keep moving on them. Usually we give it about a week and then email them again. I've had interconnections approved within like a couple hours, just because I've been on top of them for previous events. And then other times, I think the first installation we did, it took them about 3 months to approve it.
Well,
Because Gene Smith's was quite painful, so. And then you wait for that utility company. Then they'll send you an email back saying, okay, you can turn your system on, and you just turn it on. And you start, that's when your system is on, you leave it on, and that's it, you don't have to think about it. We had a question on the side last night about windmills. Somebody said, well, I have really good wind. I've got a really, really great spot for a windmill. Wind is very, very site-specific. It's extremely more site-specific than solar. Everybody thinks they have good sun. Even more people think they have great wind. So windmills are again, site-specific. They're 7, 8 years ago when we first started getting involved with solar, you look at a windmill, a 10 kilowatt windmill or a 10 kilowatt solar array, they were about the same cost. And at the time in Pennsylvania, they gave money in addition to the tax credit for the solar. So that dropped the cost of the solar, and then you factor in the idea that in the solar, there's virtually no maintenance to it. You know, there's no moving parts, you really don't have to worry about doing anything, where with a windmill, you've got plenty of moving parts. So people kept going with the solar array because it was cheaper and no maintenance to it. Then, as time went on, Jack had said, explained how the prices had dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped. Well, the windmill prices really haven't dropped too much. So, same amount of savings with solar versus a windmill, the price of solar to a windmill is probably about a third. The only time I'd really encourage a windmill is if you do have a good spot for it and you're really trying to go off the grid, because the windmill functions a little bit better during the winter and solar a lot better during the summer.
The biggest thing in maintenance of the solar is just check the wiring, make sure nothing's wear. If you have any of those wires on the roof dip down and touch the roof, when the wind's blowing, they're rubbing, and they're gonna lose insulation. That's really the only maintenance you have. Whereas a windmill, you've gotta grease those gears and lower, if it's on a pole, you gotta lower it down. So it's a mess. And there's no device that can measure the wind you get at the same location at one time. You have to leave a device to measure the wind there for the whole year round to get a good measurement of the wind potential at any one location. Whereas the Pathfinder lets us measure the solar resource one time for the whole year. So it's a lot easier to be sure you've got a good resource.
And then the only issue we had with maintenance on one was a customer that these wires and stuff, they're all rated for UV, they're all rated for weather and any type of thing you could throw at it. However, the one customer, when you click these together, there's a little rubber seal in here. And he was painting his house and caulking his windows and stuff like that. And he actually had sprayed a bee's nest with it. And the acid in the bee's nest didn't do anything to the wires at all, but it got somehow in here and ate away that little tiny rubber seal, and then he had to shorten his panel. And that was the one thing. So just, be mindful. And this was because we had some of these wires a little bit exposed on the one side of his house, and he had, that's where the bees were, and he had sprayed that, and then there was a little bit of a spark, and the system shut down. So, but yeah, the maintenance of it is sometimes we have a couple guys in Lackawaxen, right along Lackawaxen River, and they got a lot of oak trees that just blow pollen on their panels. If you want to clean it off, or you live on a dusty road and people drive by and dust gets all over them, just spray them off with a garden hose in the morning. Don't wait until the afternoon when they get really, really hot with, spraying it with cold water. Spray it off in the morning, and if you really want to get up there and be active and take a squeegee and stuff, you can, but I wouldn't get too crazy with it.
Usually not worth it, from my perspective, to get them on the roof and take the risk.
Are there any chances that a couple, 10 years from now, the utility can change their mind and say we're not taking in anymore?
Well, the idea is, you could, I guess, answer that, but you're not supposed to be, by the requirements, you're not supposed to be producing or putting up more than 110% of what you actually use in a given year. So they don't want you to have a massive field that you use $50 a month in electric and then just cover the field with 1,000 solar panels, because then you become like a small generating facility in their eyes. They don't want you to do that, so they really shouldn't sign off on it unless it's more than 110% of what you use. So that then, if 10 years from now they're not paying you for that extra 10% you're producing, it's really not that big of a deal, because you're still making whatever you're consuming.
So I'll give a different answer. Everything he said is right, okay? But if you look across the nation, there are states that are reevaluating net metering and how it works financially. The only state that has canceled net metering is Hawaii, where the solar is already 30% of the entire net island's electric capacity. So solar is hugely popular in Hawaii. Until like 18 months ago, Hawaii had most of its electricity generated by imported oil. And oil back 18 months ago was a lot more expensive than it is now. And the price per kilowatt hour was over 30 cents a kilowatt hour. So solar was vastly popular. And at some threshold, the utility in the state started denying any new systems to be connected to the grid. And then for about a year, they held up everything. The Hawaii Public Utility Commission did decide to cancel net metering. Now, that could not happen in Pennsylvania because net metering is actually a law passed by the legislature. And so it varies by state whether it's put into effect by the Public Utility Commission or the legislature. In our state, the legislation would have to be changed in order for net metering to go away. Now, there has been discussion of new fees that might be added. Those would only apply to new connections, not existing ones. And what happened after 2 years of work at the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, they issued a final set of new rules for net metering that changed that 110%, which is a gray number, because that's not in any legislation or law, but that's what PPL has chosen to implement. Other utilities have other limits. They were putting in place a uniform limit across the state, but that and many other changes into the kind of minutia of the law, of the regulation. But in just last month, there's an internal regulatory review commission in Harrisburg that has to review every state regulation before it goes into effect. And at that meeting, the solar industry and other advocates for the environment protested the regulation. They said the Public Utility Commission has overstepped its bounds by putting restrictions on residential solar in this new regulation, and may introduce fees as part of that. The commission rejected those regulations and sent it back to the Public Utility Commission to start over. So we're still in the situation